So just as a reminder, what we've been doing, we have been solving a new type of equation called, what kind of equations have we been solving? Quadratic. How do you tell if an equation is quadratic or not? It's got an x squared in it. What are the ways that we could solve? 3 ways. Rita, what's that? Quadratic formula. Factoring. Okay, reading them really doesn't help too much. What does that mean, square root principal property? What does that mean to do? Almost. You need to add to that. Take the plus and minus square root. Good. Okay, so this one is not, it's just a little bit more on the quadratic formula. A lot of times we don't necessarily have to solve an equation, a quadratic equation. We just have to state how many solutions there are. And there's a way to, now obviously, to figure out how many equations or how many solutions a quadratic equation has, you could solve the whole thing. But there's actually a way to do it without solving. So you don't have to go through that entire process. And we've been solving quadratic equations over this unit that have had no solution, 1 solution, or 2 solutions. Okay. So what we want to be able to do is, if I give you a quadratic equation like the 3 you see here, I want you to be able to tell me how many solutions there are without actually having to solve it. And there is a way we can do that. But before we figure out that way, we're actually going to solve them. And we're going to use the quadratic formula. Do you remember the quadratic formula? Negative b plus minus square root b squared minus 4ac. Good. What's a in this quadratic equation? B and c. Okay. So we get negative 6 plus minus negative 6 in parentheses. Whenever you put a negative in, you've got to use parentheses. It will always be a communication error if you forget them. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 5, all over 2 times 1. Negative 6 becomes positive 6. What is negative 6 all squared? Negative 6 all squared, 36, minus 20, divided by 2. Keep going. We get square root of 16. Now, what can we do with the square root? We can take it exactly, can't we? We get 4. So we get 6 plus or minus 4 divided by 2, which means we need to split it and figure out what 6 plus 4 divided by 2 is and what 6 minus 4 divided by 2 is. And those will be our answers. So we're going to get answers, we're going to get solutions that don't have square roots in them in this one. Okay, we're going to get rational numbers. So what's 6 plus 4 divided by 2? 5. 6 minus 4 divided by 2? 1. Therefore, we have 2 solutions, 5 and 1. This next one, let's just jump straight in to plug it in. So we get this negative 6 again, plus or minus the square root of negative 6 all squared, minus 4 times 1 times 9, divided by 2 times 1. Negative 6 becomes positive, plus or minus negative 6 all squared is 36 again, minus 4 times 1 times 9, which is also 36. So we get 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 divided by 2. What can I do with that square root? What's that? Simplify? What do you mean say by? What does that mean? You can absolutely take the square root of 0. What is the square root of 0? 0. So doesn't this work out to 6 plus minus 0 divided by 2? Well, the plus minus doesn't matter, because 6 plus 0 is still 6. 6 minus 0 is still 6. So we get 6 divided by 2, which is 3. How many solutions? 1. Come on. Why is this all of a sudden not writing? 1 solution. And finally, this last one, again, we get x equals minus 6 plus or minus negative 6 all squared minus 4 times 1 times 13 divided by 2 times 1. Negative 6 becomes positive, plus or minus 36 minus 4 times 1 times 13, which works out to 52, divided by 2. What do I get when I subtract 36 by 52? Negative negative 16. Now what? You can't take the square root of a negative number, which means you can't figure out a number here, or numbers. Not 0. No solution. Okay? This tells you that there's no solution. Once you see a square root of a negative, no such number exists, which means there's no answer or answers. So in this one, we would get 0 solutions. Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you to think now. Let's say I didn't want to know what the answers were. I just wanted to know how many there were. What part of the quadratic formula could you look at to tell me the answer right away? What part tells me whether there's 2 answers, 1 answer, or no answers? Rita? Look what's inside the square root. Okay. When we got 16, a positive number, there were 2 solutions. When we got 0, how many were there? 1. When we got a negative answer, there were none. So all you actually have to do If you're asked just how many solutions there are, is do the quadratic formula, but only the part under the square root. If it's a positive number, that means there's two solutions. If it's exactly zero, that means there's one solution. If it's negative, that means there can't be any solutions. So you only have to look at that section underneath the square root. Okay? So it determines what we call the nature of the roots. When you're asked about the nature of the roots, that means the exact same thing as how many solutions there are. So we don't care about the actual solutions themselves. We just care about how many there are. So we call this expression under the square root, which is b squared minus 4ac, the discriminant. D-I-S-C-R-I-M-I-N-A-N-T. The discriminant, that section under the square root of the quadratic formula, tells us how many solutions there are. If you calculate that b squared minus 4ac, and it works out to less than zero, in other words, negative. How many solutions are there? If it works out to a negative, zero. No solutions, zero solutions. Actually, I'll put zero solutions. If you calculate that b squared minus 4ac and it works out to exactly zero, there's one. If you calculate that b squared minus 4ac and it is greater than zero, in other words, it is a positive number, there will always be two solutions. They may be two rational numbers, they may have square roots in them, but there's two of them. So this is really the meat of the lesson right here. If you're asked to find the nature of the roots or how many solutions there are, use this part of the quadratic formula, figure out which one of these it is, and that will tell you how many solutions there are. So let's just look at a few more examples. We are asked, without solving, determine the nature of the roots. What that means is how many solutions. So we don't have to do the whole thing. We only have to do the part underneath the quadratic formula, or underneath the square root of the quadratic formula. What's b in this case? So I got to go negative 12 squared minus 4 times what's a? 4 times c, which is 9. And then I got to figure that out. Negative 12 all squared. Positive 144. 4 times 4 times 9. 144. Which equals 0. You're not done yet. It doesn't mean that there's 0 solutions. How many solutions are there? 1. Try the next one on your own, please. Pretty straightforward. just need to figure out what A, B, and C are, put it into the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, get the answer. That tells you how many solutions. Notice I don't have to put parentheses around the 5 when I square, only if it's negative. You can put parentheses if you want, but you don't need to when it's positive. So then we got to calculate. And you should get this. $98. 97 because I can't add. Thank you. How many solutions? 2 solutions. And the last one, you could probably figure out how many solutions there are going to be. So B is -2, so I got to go -2 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 3. That gives me +4 minus 12, which is -8. 0 solutions. This last one, you got to think a little bit. Remember, root, that means the same as solution. So you're given a quadratic equation, but you're not told what this number is. The only thing you're told is that it has one real solution, one solution. How can I use the discriminant, what we just learned, to figure this out? Farida?
That means
Equals what?
no, 0, 0.
0. Good. If it has one solution, doesn't the discriminant have to equal 0? So I just wrote that. Well, now let's fill in what we know. What's B? 10. I'll put parentheses this time. Minus 4 times, what's A? What's C? A. What did I just create? An equation that I can solve for K. So 10 squared is 100. What's an easier way to say 4 times 1 times K? 4K. So I've simplified it a little bit, equals 0, and then just solve, get K by itself. Remember, this is not a quadratic equation. This is just a regular one. Don't overthink here. Don't we just move everything to one side to get K by itself? So I got to move the 100 over by subtracting 100. And I get -4K is equal to -100. Then what? Divide by -4, divide by -4. So K is equal to +25. Okay. So I would like you to have exercise 3.5 done by Monday. I'm going to cover 3.6 tomorrow, which is how we can use graphing to solve equations. And then I will assign 3.6 for Monday as well. So 3.5 and 3.6 are due Monday. So you've got time now. You can get a really big chunk of 3.5 done and get it out of the way.